My name is Karla. I'm 29 years old, and I'm an English teacher at a quiet community college in a small town where everything seems to move a little slower. People say it's peaceful, and maybe it is, but for me, it had become something else entirely. Safe. After what happened 3 years ago, safety became my way of living. I didn't go on dates. I didn't let people in. I stopped answering late-night messages from old friends, stopped picking up calls from my sister. I didn't have the strength to talk about the past again. I told myself, "You're fine. Teaching is enough. Routine is enough. You don't need anyone else." And for a while, that lie worked. My life had a rhythm. I walked to school every morning, holding my thermos of tea like it was an anchor. I wrote lesson plans that were a little too detailed. I smiled at students in the hallway, always warm, never too open. I kept everything within the walls of my job. I was proud of that. Professional, put together, reliable. But deep down, I was just numb. The pain from my last relationship hadn't left me. It had only become quieter, like a song you hear through the wall, always faint, always there. His name was Mark, and he was the first person I had ever imagined forever with. And then, without warning, forever ended. The details no longer matter. What mattered was that I had learned not to trust my heart. So when the new semester began, I treated it like any other. I stood in front of my classroom in my navy blue sweater, with my hair tied back and a smile practiced in the mirror that morning. "Good morning, everyone," I said. "My name is Miss Karla, and this is English Communication 102. A few students looked up from their phones. Others scribbled the course title on their notebooks. I scanned the room, doing what I always did, counting heads, checking names, organizing in my mind who would be the talkers and who would need encouragement. And then I saw him. He sat in the front row, a little off to the side. Brown hair, calm expression, eyes that didn't dart away when I made eye contact, but held it curious, unafraid. His name was Leon. He didn't stand out in any dramatic way. He wasn't loud. He didn't interrupt or try to make an impression. But something about the way he looked at me, steady, focused, unsettled me. Not in a bad way, just enough to make me notice. I moved on, finished my introduction, handed out syllabi. But as the weeks passed, it became harder not to notice Leon. He was always early, always prepared. He took notes like he was absorbing not just the language, the feeling behind every word. When he spoke in class, he didn't just answer, he reflected. And when I walked in, he smiled. Not a wide smile, not a flirtatious one, just a small, sincere curve of the lips, like he was glad I was there. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that I was imagining things, that he smiled at everyone, that I was just lonely, and I was. But it wasn't just that. I started to look for him when I walked in. I noticed the way his shoulders relaxed when he was listening, I noticed how he would tilt his head slightly, as if leaning into the lesson. I noticed that when the class laughed, he looked at me, not for approval, but like he wanted to share the moment. And worse, I noticed how that made me feel. Warm, human, exposed. One afternoon, I stayed behind after class to clean up the whiteboard. My mind was full of things to do, emails to send, assignments to grade. I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't turn. "Miss Karla," a voice said. I knew that voice. Gentle, measured Leon. I turned slowly. "Yes. Do you need help carrying those books?" My instinct was to say no. Keep the line, keep the boundary. But I hesitated. "It's all right," I said. "But thank you." He smiled. "It's no trouble. I'm heading that way." I should have stopped him. I knew that. But something in me didn't want to. Something in me wanted the company. We walked down the hallway in silence, books in his arms, not the kind of silence that feels awkward. It was comfortable. "Your lessons are really easy to follow," he said quietly. "I never liked English before, but I like how you explain things." "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I think it's because you care." I paused. That wasn't the kind of compliment you get every day. We reached the staff room. I unlocked the door. "Thanks, Leon," I said. He handed me the books. Our hands brushed for a moment. "See you Thursday," he said, and turned to go. I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and felt something shift in my chest. That night, I sat on my couch with a blanket, staring at the television without watching. My tea had gone cold. I wasn't really thinking about anything, but I felt something again, and it scared me, because I had promised myself no more, no more falling, no more vulnerability, no more giving someone the power to break me. But there it was, the feeling. Small, quiet, undeniable. I told myself it didn't mean anything. A smile, a shared silence, a kind gesture. I told myself I was overthinking it, that my mind was filling in stories where there were none, because I'd been alone for too long. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't just loneliness. It wasn't just the echo of a heart that hadn't been held in years. It was him, the way he noticed things, the way he listened, not just to words, to pauses, to tone, to silence. And more than anything, it was the way I felt when he was near. That part scared me the most, because it didn't feel like danger. It felt like peace, and that's what made it dangerous. The days passed, and nothing wrong happened. No lines were crossed. Every moment felt full of something I couldn't name, and I think he felt it too. I found myself waiting for him, not consciously, not obviously, but my heart noticed the sound of his footsteps before class. My eyes found his name on the attendance list faster than anyone else's, and when he spoke, I paid closer attention. Too close. I hated it, not because it was awful, because it was beautiful. One Monday, after a rainy weekend, I was standing at the front of the class, talking about past tenses. I asked a question, and Leon raised his hand. He answered perfectly, and when I smiled and nodded, he smiled back. That moment should have passed like any other, but it didn't. It stayed with me the entire day. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with papers to grade, but I wasn't reading them. My thoughts drifted back to his voice, his words, his eyes, and then I thought of Mark, my ex. I remembered how our relationship had started, how warm it was at first, how simple. I remembered the late night talks and the early morning coffee runs. And then I remembered the day it ended, how cold it was, how sudden, how I had begged him to stay, how he looked me in the eye and said, "I just don't feel the same anymore." After that day, I had sealed myself off from the world, and now here I was feeling again, for someone I wasn't supposed to feel anything for. It made me angry, at myself, at the universe, at timing. I didn't sleep well that night. 2 days later, class ended like usual. Students packed up and left, laughing, joking, tapping away on their phones. I stayed behind, organizing the desk, pretending I wasn't listening to every footstep. And then, "Miss Karla," I turned. Leon was standing near the door, backpack slung over one shoulder. His hair was damp from the mist outside. "Yes," I said, my voice too soft. "I just wanted to say, I really enjoy your class. I've never felt this focused before. It's different." "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. "That means a lot." He hesitated, eyes searching mine. "You're different. You care. You don't just teach, you see people." My stomach tightened. "Leon," I said slowly, "I'm your teacher. You can't say things like that." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cross a line. I just wanted you to know." He left, and I just stood there, my hands trembling. I should have stopped him sooner. I should have said more, been firmer, but I didn't, because part of me didn't want to, and I hated that part of me. The next day, I told myself, be normal, be firm, be untouchable. I smiled at my students. I explained grammar rules. I walked around the room like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Leon didn't say anything unusual that day. He didn't stay after class, but I felt him. I felt his gaze, steady and patient, and that made it worse. That afternoon, I went to the campus cafe for tea. I stood in line, trying to look casual, and then he was there. He waved. I wanted to walk away. I should have walked away, but I didn't. "Can I sit with you?" he asked, holding his tray. I nodded okay. We sat at a corner table, a safe distance between us. He asked about books I liked. I asked about his major. We talked about simple things, normal things, but nothing about the way I felt was normal. "I don't have many friends," he admitted, "but I feel at ease when I'm in your class. It's like the noise in my head turns down." I looked at him. "Leon, we can't be friends, you know that." He nodded, lowering his eyes. "I know." That night, I lay awake in bed. I watched the ceiling for hours. My hands were cold, my chest felt tight, and my mind would not stop. Why him? Why now? Why this? The next week, he stayed again. He didn't pretend this time. He stood in front of my desk and said, "I know this isn't okay. I know I shouldn't say anything, but I think about you all the time." I didn't respond. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I just want to be honest." "Leon," I whispered, "you're too young. I'm your teacher." "I'm not trying to disrespect that," he said, "but it doesn't feel wrong to me." I looked away. "It does to me." That was a lie. It didn't feel wrong. It felt soft. It felt like the first warm breeze after a long winter. It felt like something I'd lost a long time ago. After he left, I sat at my desk with my head in my hands. I wanted to run. I wanted to resign. I wanted to scream. But more than anything, I wanted to see him again. And that truth was the sharpest blade of all. The sky was gray all morning. You could smell the rain before it arrived, the kind of smell that clings to the wind and the windows, a scent of something waiting to fall. My chest felt tight that day. I told myself it was the weather. But the truth was, something inside me was beginning to collapse under its own silence. We had been dancing around the edges of something for weeks. I avoided him when I could. I left the classroom quickly, stayed in the teacher's lounge longer. I answered other students' questions with more enthusiasm. I tried, but his presence lingered like perfume, subtle, persistent, always there when I wasn't prepared for it. That Friday, we finished early. A surprise quiz had gone faster than expected, and students trickled out quickly, glad for the short afternoon. Outside, the rain had finally begun, soft at first, but steady. I was erasing the board when I heard him behind me. "Miss Karla." I didn't turn around. Yes. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he spoke. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "I just want to be honest." I closed my eyes. "Please don't say anything more." But he did. "I think about you every day. I try not to. I really do. But I can't help it." I gripped the edge of the desk. "You're my teacher," I said. "I'm supposed to be strong." "And you are," he said gently. I turned around. He was standing by the door, not moving closer, not pushing. "You don't know what this feels like," I said. "I go home every night and try to convince myself that what I feel isn't real." "Is it working?" he asked. I hated that he asked that, because I didn't want to lie, and I didn't want to tell the truth. I didn't answer. I just picked up my bag and walked past him into the rain. I didn't bother opening my umbrella. I wanted the rain to hide the tears on my face. I reached my car, hands shaking as I found the keys. I sat in the driver's seat, and for a while, I didn't move. The sound of rain on the windshield filled the silence, and I cried, not because of Leon, but because I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was the woman who built walls, who kept everything in neat little boxes, who didn't let emotions lead. And now, I was unraveling. I went home and changed into dry clothes, made tea, sat by the window. I looked out at the falling rain and thought of his eyes, his words, "I will never do anything wrong. I just wanted you to know." And suddenly, I realized he wasn't trying to seduce me. He wasn't playing some game. He wasn't immature or selfish. He was just sincere. And that made it harder, because part of me wanted to run to him, but another part, the part that had been shattered before, whispered, "Don't you dare." The next day was Saturday. I didn't leave the house. I didn't answer calls. I read the same page of a book 3 times and still couldn't remember what it said. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. He's in my head, in my heart. I don't know if it's right, but it's real, and I haven't felt something real in a very long time. When I closed the journal, I stared at it for a long time. I didn't sleep much that night. The following Monday, class resumed. I did everything I could to stay distant. I greeted everyone cheerfully. I stood straighter. I didn't look toward the front row, but I felt his gaze. He didn't say anything unusual that day. He didn't linger, but he looked tired, like he was trying just as hard to be normal. After class, I packed up quickly, but before I could leave, I heard his voice. "Miss Karla." I turned, heart already racing. "Can we talk?" I looked at the clock. I had another class in 20 minutes. But more than that, I was afraid. "I don't want to make you sad," he said. "You didn't," I replied. "But this is hard." He nodded. "I understand." We stood in silence for a moment. The room felt too big and too quiet. "I'm your teacher," I whispered. "You're my student. This isn't right." "I know," he said, voice low, "but it doesn't feel wrong." I looked at him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't teasing. He was just honest. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't infatuation. It was something deeper, something frightening. "You have a future to build," I said. "This could only hurt us." "I don't want to hurt you," he said again, "but it hurts to pretend I feel nothing." I looked away, picked up my bag. "I have to go," I said. He didn't follow. He didn't beg. He just watched me walk out the door. That evening, I made soup but didn't eat it, turned on the TV but didn't watch. My mind was full of memories I hadn't lived yet. What his hand might feel like in mine. What it would be like to hear him say my name outside of the classroom. What it would be like to stop pretending. I hated myself for imagining it, but I did. I sat by the window again, listening to the wind outside. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered something aloud. I wish things were different. The last week of the semester always carried a strange energy, equal parts excitement, relief, and quiet endings. For most students, it meant freedom. For teachers, it meant grading, paperwork, and a short breath before the next cycle began. But for me, that week was different, because it wasn't just the end of a semester. It was the end of a boundary. I counted down the days with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Not because I wanted something to happen, but because I didn't know how to pretend anymore when it finally didn't matter. Leon had stopped speaking after class. He came in, sat in his usual seat, contributed when asked, and left with the others. But the silence between us was louder than words, and yet I knew we were both counting the same thing. On the final day, I stood at the front of the class with my usual end-of-semester speech. I handed back final essays. I thanked them for their participation, their questions, their effort. Most of them clapped. Some took selfies. One girl gave me a drawing of my face in cartoon style. It made me smile. But Leon didn't clap. He didn't leave. He stayed. I knew he would. When the room had emptied and the hallway sounds faded into nothing, I looked up. He was standing by my desk, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. "So, that's it," he said. "That's it," I replied. "I'm not your student anymore." I nodded slowly. "No, you're not." He took a small step forward, not too close. "Just enough, can we talk?" I glanced at the door, though no one was near. "Okay." We walked outside into the sunlight. Spring had arrived in full bloom. The trees were green, and the wind was warm. We sat on the same bench where he once said he'd wait. He kept his eyes on the ground for a moment. "I still feel the same," he said quietly. "Nothing's changed for me." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't say anything, because I still felt it too. I thought I wouldn't. I thought distance would make it fade, but it hadn't. If anything, it had grown roots. He turned toward me. "I don't want to play games. I don't want to make this harder than it already is. But I want to know you outside of that classroom, just as you." I looked at the trees ahead, their leaves dancing in the breeze. "Maybe," I said, "not now, but maybe next week." He smiled a real smile, the kind that made my stomach turn a little. "Okay," he said, "next week." That week, I thought more than I slept. I replayed every moment, every conversation, every brush of the hand, every glance across the room. I weighed the risks. I heard the voices in my head. "He's too young. People will judge you. What if this is all just temporary? What if it breaks you again?" But none of those voices could quiet what I felt when I remembered the softness in his voice, or the steadiness in his eyes. He wasn't a boy. He wasn't trying to fix me. He just cared, and that was something I hadn't allowed myself to receive in a long time. The following Friday, I sat at a quiet cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. I picked the table by the window, my tea untouched in front of me. My fingers trembled as I wrapped them around the cup. Then I saw him. He walked in, hands in the pockets of his coat. He looked calm. When he saw me, he smiled. He sat across from me. "Hi, Karla," he said. "Just Karla. Not Miss Karla, not teacher. Just me." "Hi," I said. My voice was softer than I expected. We didn't rush into anything. We talked about books, about summer plans, about our favorite films, and how neither of us could finish a puzzle without getting frustrated. It wasn't intense. It wasn't dramatic. It was easy. And that scared me more than anything, because it felt like it had always been there, this version of us, in another life maybe, sitting like this. And yet, it was brand new. When we left the cafe, he didn't try to hold my hand. He didn't ask to see me again. He just said, "Thank you for today." And I said, "Thank you for waiting." Over the next few weeks, we met again and again, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for a walk, sometimes just to sit under a tree in silence. He didn't push. He never made me feel rushed. And slowly, I stopped being afraid of being seen. One afternoon, we sat on a park bench while the sun dipped behind the trees. He looked at me. "Do you still worry what people might say?" he asked. I nodded. "Sometimes. And do you still think about what's right?" I smiled. "All the time." He reached for my hand, slowly, gently, like asking for permission without speaking. I let him take it, and in that moment, it didn't matter what the world thought, because I knew what was real. Him, me, this. Summer came slowly that year. The days grew longer, the evenings warmer, and for the first time in years, I felt time stretch, not with loneliness, but with a quiet kind of possibility. Leon and I continued to meet. There was no grand confession, no whirlwind romance, no declarations of forever. Just moments, soft, real, and steady. We didn't speak often about the past, though sometimes it surfaced. One evening, as we walked along the lake, the sun slipping behind distant hills, he asked, "Do you ever miss who you were before everything?" I knew what he meant. Before heartbreak, before fear, before caution became my second skin. "I do," I said, "but I think I like who I'm becoming more." He smiled at that. And so did I, because it was true. I was learning to laugh again, real laughter, not the polite kind I gave to colleagues. I was rediscovering small joys. The way my feet sank into the grass when I walked barefoot, the sound of birds before sunrise, the scent of books at second-hand stores. I was, slowly, becoming alive again, but the fear never fully left me. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what people would think if they knew. If my sister found out, if my department found out, if anyone from the outside looked in and saw the difference in our ages and our roles and missed the truth of it all. That it was never about rules. It was about healing, about connection, about love that arrived quietly and waited patiently. One afternoon, as we sat beneath an old tree in a quiet park, I turned to Leon. "I haven't told anyone about us," I said. "Not my sister, not my friends." He nodded slowly. "That's okay. I'm not hiding you," I added. "I'm just protecting this. It still feels fragile." He reached over and took my hand. "We don't owe anyone anything," he said. "This is ours." And in that moment, I believed him. Eventually, I did tell my sister. It was a late evening in July, and we were sitting in her kitchen. The air smelled like basil and lemon. I hadn't planned to say anything, but the words came on their own. "There's someone I'm seeing," I said. She looked up from her tea. "Though," I hesitated. "He used to be a student, but he isn't anymore. He's kind, smart, steady, and younger than me, 9 years younger." She was quiet. I prepared myself for judgment, for raised eyebrows or polite concern. But after a moment, she asked only one thing. "Are you happy?" I nodded. She smiled. "Then that's what matters." I cried that night, not because I was sad, but because it was the first time in years that someone saw me without conditions. Leon didn't bring flowers or make grand romantic gestures. He brought me books he thought I'd like. He remembered how I took my tea. He once left a note on my windshield that simply said, "Today is easier because I saw you." It wasn't loud love. It was quiet, but it was real. And it taught me something. That love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or grand timing. Sometimes it tiptoes in when you least expect it, when you've closed every door and sworn never again. And sometimes it teaches you not to be afraid of feeling, of hoping, of beginning again. There were still days I doubted, days I wondered if the world would always raise an eyebrow, if people would always see our story as a rule broken instead of a heart mended. But those days were fewer, because every time I looked at him, at the way he listened, at the way he respected the quiet between us, I knew I had chosen something true. I didn't need it to last forever, but I hoped it would. And for now, that was enough. Months passed. The leaves began to turn again. The air grew cooler. I started a new semester with new students and fresh lesson plans. Leon began working part-time at a local bookstore. He loved it. He would tell me stories of the customers, the children who came in for picture books, the older women who talked too long about historical fiction, and we built a rhythm not dramatic, not reckless, just steady. Sometimes we met for coffee after my class. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes he told me about his fears, about not knowing what the future would look like, about the pressure to have it all figured out. And sometimes I told him about mine, about feeling too old, too broken, too unsure of where I belonged anymore. But neither of us tried to fix the other. We just listened. And in that listening, something beautiful happened. We both grew. One night, as we sat watching stars from the hood of his car, he turned to me. "I know I'm still young," he said, "and I don't have everything figured out. But I know this, I care about you deeply. I see you, not as a teacher, not as someone older, just as you." I took a deep breath. "I care about you too, and that scares me sometimes." "I know," he said, "it scares me too." We looked up at the stars again. Nothing more needed to be said. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll grow together. Maybe we'll grow apart. Maybe the world will make it harder than it already is. But I do know this. He found me when I had forgotten how to feel. And he reminded me that love doesn't always wait for perfect timing.